Ladies and gents, welcome back. My next guest, I actually invited on for one particular story about corporate welfare, and it turns out he's been writing a lot. There's been a lot in the news lately, and well, let's just get into it. Franco Terrazzano of the Taxpayers Federation, thank you so much for coming in once again.
Hey, my pleasure. Always look forward to our chats.
So I wanted to bring you in because of this corporate welfare situation. So Volkswagen recently got this giant corporate handout from the Canadian taxpayer, essentially. I mean, the governments always like to give out what they say government funding, but it's taxpayer funding. Now, this was to the tune of how many billions of dollars? And immediately after, anyone else who had any inkling of doing similar work in the country decided, hey, we're not going to do that until we get a check too. Isn't that not the case?
Well, it sure is. I mean, so the tune of $16 billion to the multinational corporation Volkswagen. Now, that was the single largest corporate welfare scheme in Canadian history. And to your point, I mean, think about the precedent that sets.
Yeah.
A pretty bad one for taxpayers, right? Because it's not just us who heard the news. Every lobbyist and their dog in Ottawa is now lining up around the block in front of Parliament Hill with their cap in hand, looking for their own big, fat, juicy taxpayer handout. And case in point, not too long after, Stellantis, the parent company for Maserati, Alfa Romeo, other car companies, well, guess what? They wanted their own special deal as well, and they got $15 billion from the feds. So in a matter of what, like a couple months, the feds essentially and the Ontario government gave about $31 billion announced for these two multinational car corporations.
So, I mean, where does this money come from? I mean, at the end of the day, Canadian tax revenue can only come in so much. And I know they're raising taxes. They're not telling us that they're raising taxes. They're raising levies and other kinds of things on top of carbon credits. I guess I'm not sure what they're calling it. Levies on the fuel taxes as well.
Carbon tax.
Well,
it's a tax, right? Like let's not play their little game. It's a tax, but I know what you're trying to get at. Like, how are they going to get this money?
Mm-hmm.
Well, at the end of the day, it's going to come from Canadians' pockets, one way or another, right? Whether that's tax hikes today, tax hikes tomorrow plus interest, or the printing press. Brr, right? That's been on overdrive during the pandemic when the central bank printed up hundreds of billions of dollars right out of thin air, then dropped it into an economy that was largely locked down because of government fiat. Surprise, surprise, prices went up. Inflation reached a 40-year high, as inflation always goes up when central banks are running the printing press like crazy. But look, the government likes to spout out these claims about jobs. Two things to that. $31 billion divided by the number of jobs governments claim will happen. That's a cost to taxpayers of about $5 million per job. What? In what world can we even like objectively say that we should be doing this?
That's unreal. Well, you actually gave a perfect segue to the next story that I wanted to talk about, and that's the $20 million in bonuses that were given out to the Bank of Canada, despite 40-year highs in inflation. I mean, this is when we have this much debt going on, they're adding on to the debt. I think the Fraser Institute did a study. They said based on the interest rate at the beginning of the year in February, it was going to be 60 some odd billion dollars a year just in interest on the debt alone. They've raised the interest rates to 5% now at this point, and that's just going up and up and up. So they're doing a terrible job, and yet they're handing out bonuses on our time.
You know, I can't believe I have to say this, but bonuses are for people who do a good job, not for people who fail at their one and only job, right? The Bank of Canada has one job, folks. One job. That's to keep inflation low and around 2%. Well, if you left the rock that you're living under in the last year and head over to a grocery store or a gas pump, you know the central bank failed to do its one and only job. Well, how did the central bank hold itself accountable? By handing out $20 million in bonuses in 2022. So get this. At best, the central bank, or Bank of Canada, failed to keep a lid on rising prices. At best, it failed. At worst, It drove the inflation by printing more than $300 billion right out of thin air. Okay, so the Bank of Canada makes your life more expensive by allowing the inflation to happen, if not exacerbating it. Then it makes your life more expensive with higher interest rates, higher mortgage payments, higher consumer debt. And then it gives itself a nice pat on the back and $20 million in bonuses to 80% of its workforce.
Now, isn't there a market principle that says if people have less money to invest or do other things with, then it'll end up with less tax revenue in the end? If you overtax a population, there's a diminishing return, is there not, on that?
Yeah, you're plucking the golden goose. But hold on a second. A couple things there, right? Number one, most organizations don't shower their employees with bonuses when they have their worst year in 4 decades. Inflation was a 40-year high last year. The Bank of Canada showered its employees with $20 million in bonuses, on top of $18 million in bonuses in 2021, on top of $16 million in bonuses in 2020. I think your audience gets what's going on here in Ottawa. But let's talk about the difference between business and government.
Mm-hmm.
In business, if you don't do a good job, you go out of business. In government, if you don't do a good job, you give yourself a bonus. Why? Because you're not. Well, why? Because you're not earning the money. You're taking the money from taxpayers through those higher taxes, or just the government essentially using the printing press to finance its deficits. But that's the difference.
That's unreal. I can't get over it, and it's just amazing to me that people are more upset about this. I mean, it's just the money is flying out the window, and it's not just flying out the window in those cases. We have also the Governor General going on trips and spending cash. What do we have here? The Governor General bills taxpayers $71,000 for that. What you called it, the ice limo during a foreign trip. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, the Governor General went on a 4-day trip to Iceland, okay? And the Governor General and the band of bureaucrats with the Governor General racked up a $71,000 bill at a company called Ice Limo Luxury Transportation or Luxury Services, okay? So we spent $71,000 essentially so the Governor General and her entourage of 15 people could experience luxury travel in Iceland. Now, I don't know what's the craziest part of the story. The fact that the Governor General spent $71,000, which is more money than a brand new BMW. So she could have saved money by buying a Beamer and then just leaving it there in Iceland. So that's pretty bizarre. Or is the most bizarre fact that the Governor General spent $71,000 on luxury transportation services when her hotel was an 8-minute walk away from the main conference center? Or is the most bizarre point that she brought along her director of communications and her manager of strategic communications, and not one of them said, hey boss, spending $71K on ice limos may not be a very good look right now.
No, it's not. It's like they need to spend more money on a PR team, it would seem. But they have no money. No, okay, you got me there. You got me there. Giving them ideas, they'll spend. If you can give them ideas to spend money, they'll get on it. They just need to keep that budget high. How does that work anyway? So you have the Governor General, and she has a budget, and she just has to fill that budget every year, or else to get less, or how does this work?
Okay, so that's actually one of the problems across government. You might have heard of March Madness. Maybe you've heard of that saying. So the fiscal year, the government's budget year ends March 31st. And March Madness comes around across all departments, and this has been going on for a long time, where department bureaucrats are like, uh-oh, we've got a bunch of money left over. Now, what would a business do if it had all this money left over? It'd be like, okay, awesome.
Save it.
Savings, right? Savings.
Capital investment.
Right? Awesome.
Yeah, that kind of thing.
Right? This is good. But with a government, right, think of the different incentives. If they don't use up all of their budget, then they are worried that politicians will give them a smaller budget in the next year, right? Because politicians will be like, well, we can save money here. We can cut this budget and it's all good. Well, the bureaucrats don't want that. So that's why they go on what's called March Madness, where they make sure they spend all the money that they had that could have been used and should have been used for savings. Instead, they just blow it because of the incentives within government.
Yeah, I've heard stories year after year about buying a massive amount of office chairs when they didn't need it. These kinds of things. It's just bloat, and it's just needless spending for the sake of spending. And this is it's outrageous. And here's another example of it. It's just more spending for the sake of spending. Here's taxpayers can't afford Trudeau's government globetrotters. Can you tell us about this story?
Yeah, well, I honestly couldn't believe it when I first saw it. I mean, kudos to Blacklock's Reporter, the online news site here in Ottawa. They're doing some great work digging up government waste as well. Kudos to them. They found that the government spent $18 million on a 4-day trip to a German book fair. It was a 4-day German book fair, and the government spent $18 million. The government's defense for the spending is, well, we were the guests of honor, so we had to spend more money for some reason. But it's almost like they don't know what it means to be a guest of honor, right? Like, if you're a guest of honor, people throw you a party. Yeah. You don't spend $18 million of your own money. But hold on, let me just continue with this, okay? Because you have an $18 million German book fair that we spent on a German book fair. We spent $71,000 on these like ICE limos, luxury travel for the governor general and their band of bureaucrats. Okay. What about the Middle East trip that is now infamous last week? Last year?
The Beef Wellington trip. That was that one, right?
Yeah. More than $1 million was spent on a week-long trip to the Middle East, and they were feasting on airplane food to the tune of $100,000, enjoying beef Wellington, beef Carpaccio, stuffed pork tenderloin.
I had to Google what beef Wellington was. I didn't even know. And it's this it's an elaborate fancy dish that just it's only ever known for being just uber fancy, like no reason for it, and just really expensive.
And the governor general, after this spending comes to light, but before we got the receipts and released them, the governor general was trying to tell Canadians that, I don't know how the trip was so expensive. It was like normal airline food. Excuse me, you can't even get beef Wellington flavored chips on Air Canada, let alone beef Wellington. Like, what? Like,
oh, that's brutal.
Come on. One more thing I want to bring up on the globetrotting.
Yeah.
Trudeau spend $61,000 going to a 2-day anti-poverty summit, and he spent $61,000 on a 5-star hotel in Manhattan, right? Because nothing screams fighting poverty like taking $61,000 from taxpayers who make less than you and spending it on 5-star hotel rooms.
That's real, and especially when he's preaching about global warming, climate change, and all of this stuff while trotting around in a private air jet, like a private airplane, spending money on all this fuel that is too expensive for the average Canadian anymore, thanks to the new carbon taxes that we all get to pay. Now, I wanted to give a big shout out to the Taxpayer Federation. Everybody needs to go over, check out the website. There's all kinds of great articles like this that Franco Terrazzano here is putting out on a daily with his entire team. Amazing work, and of course, go over and donate as well. Donate to the cause. Keep this going, because there's not a lot of people out there talking about Canadian issues for the taxpayer. There's not a lot of people standing up for our rights. What is it that you guys are doing other than just the publications?
Oh man, we try to do a ton of stuff, right? We do the publications online. We try to do as much media, social media, interviews like this, but then also behind the scenes. I mean, we get victories because of our supporters work very hard, right? We have 235,000 supporters across Canada who take action by emailing MPs, ministers, the prime ministers, their MLA, doing phone call campaigns. All that kind of stuff is also going on behind the scenes. So you might see us on the media, whether it's traditional or independent, whether it's on social media, but we also have our supporters that are really putting in the work every day. And you can also join the Canadian Taxpayers Federation as a supporter free of charge. Just go on the website and make sure you're getting our email so you know when to take action. Well,
that's how I found the article about Volkswagen, and that's why I gave you a shout. And as always, thank you so much, Franco Terrazzano, for coming on. Can people find you on Twitter?
Yeah, at Franco_nomics.
Nice, perfect. I'll make sure everyone gets that. Links, as always, in the description down below. Check them out. Thanks again.